Tonight we're going to be in 1 Timothy chapter 3, and we'll be dealing with primarily the qualifications of an elder. We did a little bit of introductory material on elders last week. As you look in 1 Timothy chapter 3, the term used there is overseer. Some translations call it a bishop. It means the same thing, one who has the oversight. It'd be kind of like a superintendent. And in other places, they're referred to as elders. In some places, they're referred to as pastors. And a pastor is one a pastor is somebody who shepherds. And so, as you look at elders, they are the ones who have the oversight of the congregation. They are older men who are qualified to shepherd the flock and guide it through all sorts of issues, dealing with everything from false teaching to watching over the souls of those who are struggling with sins and troubles, to dealing with the day-to-day issues of making sure that everything like the finances just kind of keep on running, and where the money goes for evangelism and benevolence and things like that. And so I have up here a chart that we've used in the past of breaking these qualifications down. Now, in 1 Timothy chapter 3, you have almost all of the qualifications, but there are some over in Titus chapter 1 that are separate. They're not repeated in 1 Timothy. But overall, what we read here in 1 Timothy are the vast majority of the qualifications. But here's a list of all of them. And what I did is I just simply broke them up by kind of a category, just ways, a way of breaking them up into groups that made sense to me, dealing with the different attitude issues that pertain to the eldership. If a man's going to be an overseer, what kind of attitude and disposition is he to have? What should his behavior toward others look like? What should his attitude be towards God's Word and his proficiency with it? And then dealing with how the world looks at him and his relationship with worldly things, his family relationship and everything pertaining to that, and then there are qualifications for his wife as well. And so, as you look at an elder, what you're really doing is 1 Timothy chapter 3 is laying out for us, if a man is going to be an elder, we need to look at almost every area of his life. And what you're trying to do is assess whether or not this is a man who in every area of his life is showing himself to be capable of watching over the church, watching over a local congregation and caring for it. Now, it doesn't cover it here, but as you look at elders, one of the things we see is that they're not to do it alone. There's never an instance in the Bible where you have a single elder or a single pastor, which is what you see so very often in the world today. And so he doesn't have to be a perfect man because he's going to have other elders there to counterbalance him. But he does have to be a godly man. And so what Paul has done for Timothy is he said what we're looking for is men who can shepherd the flock. What does that kind of a man look like? What sort of qualities should you see in him? And as you go through these qualities, you're looking at every area of his life, how he interacts with people, his general disposition, his attitude towards things like money, how he treats his children, how his children treat him, his relationship with his wife. Because in every area of somebody's life, you see different qualities. And a man who's good at one area is not necessarily going to be good at another. And so an elder is one who has really the full package, would be the way you'd think of it. He is a good family man. He is a good Bible student. He is a man respected amongst those in the church. He's respected amongst those in the world. He has spent a great deal of time molding his life so that he'll be ready for the time when the church needed him to shepherd the flock. And this is, more than anything else, the reason that it is so valuable to cover 1 Timothy chapter 3 right now is we're not in the middle of elder selection process. We did that a while back, but we are in the middle of preparing men to be elders. Now, what I mean by that is not necessarily that, hey, tomorrow we're going to go through this process again, But I mean, we have guys here in their 20s and in their teens and in their 30s and everywhere in between who someday this congregation is going to need to fulfill the role of elder. And what happens if we just kind of wander through life and don't prepare for when the Lord needs us? The day will come and we're not going to have men qualified to do this. And we're not going to have families qualified to do this. Because as you go through this and you look at the qualities that are required of a man who's to be an elder, it takes a man who has a godly spouse. And it takes godly women. It is very easy. And I've seen it done. If I've seen it happen once, I've seen it a dozen times. And if you ask somebody like, oh, he would say, I've seen it 200 times. Where there was a man who would have been qualified to be an elder, but he married the wrong kind of woman. And she didn't help prepare him for that. And she wasn't a helpmeet to that. And so what we want to do as Christians is be looking and saying, am I doing my job? If you're a younger person, you should be looking and saying, am I doing my job to make sure that if the church needs me to fulfill that role, I'm ready to do that when the time comes. Because the church has always needed godly leaders. And you show me a congregation that doesn't have godly leaders, and I will show you a congregation that is on its way out the door. And so it's a very big deal, the issue of leadership in the church. So what we're going to do is we're just going to deal with the qualities of an elder that come up in 1 Timothy, because after all, that's the book we're in. But we'll begin to break it down. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, it says, it is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. And I always like to stop and look at this passage for just a second, because this is often not thought of as a qualification, but it really is. He needs to desire the work. And it's important to remember that being an elder is work. It is an extra responsibility. We're told that the elders are accountable for watching over the souls of the saints, and so Paul says it's a trustworthy statement. I want you to just take this to the bank. If a man wants to be an overseer, he's desiring a fine work. It's going to be work, but it will be good work. Because as you think about it, if a man reaches the point in his life where he's now an elder in the church, of all the things that he has done in his life, is he going to be able to say that there's any more important than watching over a local congregation and all the saints in it? It is one of the most important jobs that you can ever think of having. It's a job that deals with heaven and hell. It deals with the spiritual welfare of human beings who are created in the image of God. It's a big deal. And so Paul says to Timothy, if a man desires it, he needs to know that he's desiring a fine thing. It's a good thing he's desiring. It's an honorable thing. But it is also work, because you're going to have a great burden placed on your shoulders. And so then he begins to go down the things that he must have. Now, with each of these, we'll go through it and just take a second to look at what each of them means. He must be above reproach. And you notice here, this is one from Timothy, and it's also reiterated in Titus. Above reproach means he's somebody who cannot be taken hold of. This has to do with a good reputation. He's the kind of person that you can't grab a hold of and say ugly things. Now, we've seen this with politics, especially lately. You have a guy like Herman Cain, who's been in politics here, and they're running for president. And Herman Cain came out, and everybody thought, boy, this guy's doing well, and they liked what he was saying, and all of a sudden he started going up in the polls. And then, now I don't know whether the guy did what they said he did. But did he have anything that was able to be grabbed hold of? In other words, when the woman came up and she said, oh, yeah, over the course of 13 years, he's been giving me money. And then you ask Herman Cain, hey, does your wife know about this lady? Does she know that you've been giving her money? And he says, well, no. Did we maybe run into a little bit of a problem where all of a sudden his reputation took a hit? See, that's what above reproach deals with. Even if the guy didn't do anything wrong, what did everybody begin to think after person after person after person came out of the woodwork? Well, even if he didn't do it, it doesn't look good. That's what above reproach deals with. He's the kind of person that is not only doing the right thing, but he avoids anything that would even look unfaithful. You know, he's the kind of person that doesn't just say, well, look, it's not wrong. He says, well, how is it going to look? What kind of influence am I going to have if I do that? You know, if I go down to the local pub and I don't drink even a little bit of alcohol, I just go down there and have a hamburger, well, it wouldn't be wrong, but what would it look like? That's what above reproach deals with. It deals with a man's reputation. Is he the kind of guy you'd say is squeaky clean? It doesn't have a whole bunch of skeletons in the closet. Next thing it says, he is to be a husband of one wife. This literally means a one-woman man. Now, there's a great deal of debate over this. As you look at it, on one hand, you could say, well, he's a husband of one wife, and that could mean he's only been married one time ever. And this would include then if his spouse had died, no, and he got remarried again, no, he couldn't be an elder because now he's had two wives. And so it could mean that. It could mean he is a man who has only been married to one woman ever. Now, that's not my opinion on it. I think in 1 Timothy chapter 3 here, where it says he is a husband of one wife, what you're dealing with is the issue of, is he faithful to one woman? Is he the kind of man who is a one-woman man? We translate the husband of one wife, but it speaks to the subject of fidelity in marriage, not necessarily marital status. And what I mean by that is, it doesn't deal with whether or not he's ever been married more than one time. Now, if a guy's been married more than one time, do you have to ask the question, maybe he's not a one-woman man? Yeah, absolutely. Guy says, oh yeah, I'm a one-woman man. I only have one wife. I've been married 7 times. Are you going to begin to wonder in your mind that maybe he's not a super faithful spouse? But technically speaking, it doesn't deal with the marital status as much as it deals with his behavior in marriage. He is the kind of man that is one woman in his life. He only has eyes for his wife. And if you look at an elder, that's the kind of man he needs to be. As you look at him, he's the kind of man that needs to be completely and absolutely committed to his wife, and you have no doubt in your mind that that is the kind of person he is. He is a man of faithfulness. He is a man of commitment. He is a man of godly marriage and values those things. That's what Paul is dealing with. Of course, back then you lived in a time of all sorts of issues of polygamy and different things like that. And so Paul is saying, no, he is a one-woman man. If a man's going to be an elder, he needs to have shown himself to be a man of that kind of character, that he values and honors marriage, that he makes sure that marriage bed is undefiled. He's a temperate man. Now, over in Titus, it'll say self-controlled, and it's really essentially the same thing. A temperate man or a self-controlled man it refers to his attitude towards life. It's a man who lives a balanced life. He's not prone to extremes. Now, as you look at people, there are certain people you see, and they're good people, but they're extremes. You know, you look at them, and they don't have they're unbalanced. They get excited about something, and they'll go after it 10,000%. And then when they get bored with it, what do? Well, they'll just dump it entirely and move off to something else. When they get happy, they're super, super happy. But then in 30 seconds, you say something they don't like, and what happens to them? And now they're weeping, or now they're angry. In other words, they're just extremes, back and forth in the way that they live, in the way that they think. Temperate and self-controlled is somebody who has found balance in that. They are not an extreme in any area. They're not an extreme person. They're somebody you would think of as stable. That would be another way to put it, is that they are a stable person. You don't expect that they're going to get so worked up over anything that it would cloud their judgment. Because when we are prone to extremes, that's what happens. We get really excited about something, and it clouds our judgment, and we make poor decisions. An elder needs to be able to make good decisions. He needs to be prudent or sensible. This has to do with his ability to make judgment calls. You look at an elder, and he's going to have to make thousands of decisions. And almost every single one of those decisions is going to be a wisdom decision. Meaning, you can't just say it's black or white. This is right or this is wrong. He's going to be counseling a couple, and she's going to say, my husband's doing this and this and this and this and this. And it's all his fault. And when you listen to the wife, you're going to think, that man, he's got to file his horns down at night. He's got to be just the absolute worst human being I've ever seen. But then you talk to the husband, and what's the husband going to say? Oh, that woman, she just nags, and he's going to have his story, isn't he? And then you're going to have the elders in the middle of it. Now, both of the spouses in this marriage that's in trouble, they have good points. And if you listen to either one of them individually, you would just say, well, the other one, we just need to light them on fire. That's probably the best thing to do. Let's just get rid of them. They're horrible. But when you listen to both sides, you've got to begin to take that information and make a judgment call and give them sound advice, sensible advice. Advice that doesn't say it's all her fault or it's all his fault, because in 99% of the cases, it's not all her fault and it's not all his fault. And so they're going to have to be able to think soundly. And I have down here, one commentary I was reading said, and I like the way they put it, the soundness of judgment grows out of a humble view of himself and the recognition of Christ's all-sufficiency. The tendency to make poor judgments or unwise decisions is the opposite of prudence and sensibility. People who make good judgment calls tend to be very humble people. They tend to be people who can step back, look at all sides of things, have compassion for people wherever they are in life, and look at things in an unbiased fashion. That's what you want to have in an elder, because day after day after day, whether it be the finances of the church or people who have personal problems or congregational issues, over and over and over again, they're going to have to make judgment calls where the answer isn't clear. And so they're going to have to use sound judgment. Yes? Yeah.
He has to be above reproach in his marriage, who he's married to, just everything about it. And I think sometimes people try to pull someone up into the position of elder rather than find someone who's qualified to justify somebody over that's good enough. And I know that they got to be, nobody's perfect, but all too often, if you don't pick good elders, you don't get a good outcome.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think as you look at it, we have to take it as seriously as the Bible takes it seriously. And it is important. There is a tendency, I think, where we can do this, and I've seen it. It happens a lot of times more often, I think, with deacons than elders, but it can happen with elders too, where people say, well, he'll be qualified eventually in this area. Like, he's almost there. Give him some time and he'll be there. So let's just give him the benefit of the doubt. But the reality is as you look at the Scripture, he's either meets it now or he doesn't. And And a lot of this stuff, in terms of whether he meets or not, is a judgment call of the congregation too. And it's why it's so important for all of us to be looking and saying, we're not accepting subpar, because it is such an important decision. And you're right. If we say, well, maybe he'll meet it someday, well then great, let's wait till someday. Don't do it now. And I couldn't agree with you more, because the qualifications aren't for he'll be that way eventually, or I hope he would be, or something like that. Yep, it is an exceptional, it's an exceptional position in the church that requires exceptional men. Absolutely. Well, I think it's both. You know, I think you've kind of got a dual issue there, where on one hand, the congregation has to make the decision who they're going to appoint. You know, they have to do it. When Paul wrote to Timothy and he wrote to Titus, he said, you need to go around, explain these qualifications so the congregations will be appointing elders. So the congregation has to go through these, but at the same hand, if a man is at that point where the congregation is thinking about him, he very much needs to be examining himself whether he believes himself to meet those qualifications. And I think that's part of what, when I started class this evening, that I want to emphasize is that's why I think, you know, you have people who are, you know, on their way towards the age when we begin to look at men to be elders. You know, if you could be, you know, your 20s all the way to your 40s, it doesn't matter, you know. You should be looking at yourself and saying, am I the kind of guy who's meeting these exceptional things? Am I preparing myself to be above reproach? Because you look at something like being above reproach, that's not you don't just wake up one morning and decide to become above reproach. That's a lifelong process. And so yes, as individuals, we have to be looking at these and saying, I want to be this kind of a person. And if we don't as individuals do it, by the time the congregation has to make the decision, you won't be qualified. So, yeah, I agree with you. It is very much not just a congregational thing. It is something that we as individuals have to show introspection in all the time. And you could say of almost all the qualifications of an elder that they're ones that all of us should strive for regardless of whether we're going to be an elder or not. I mean, what Christian would not do well from learning to be temperate or prudent? These are the kinds of behaviors that are good for all of us to be working on. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Okay, so we move down. He needs to be respectable. An elder is, he's got to be a well-behaved, well-organized man whose life is in order. Respectable is, it's one of those things that, I don't know how else to put it other than, you know it when you see it. You know what I mean? There are certain people you look at and you say, that is a dignified, respectable man. He's got his ducks in a row. And then you look at another guy who's got a very similar life and you say, no, he's not there. And it's just in just observing their life, you see one seems to be a little more put together. He's got a vision, a focus. He's not stumbling through life. He's put his life in order in the way he talks, in the way he fulfills his responsibilities, in the way he carries himself, his demeanor when he talks with people. He's a respectful person to others. He's the kind of person that has garnered your respect. That's what that verse is talking about. And as I said, it's one of those things that I think you look at, like really a lot of these, and you say, I know it when I see it. I know a respectable man when I look at him. Hospitable. Hospitable doesn't just have to do with having people over to your house. It has to do with an openness to others. An elder should have neither a cynical disposition nor a closed attitude toward people. When a person is hospitable, he will keep his life, home, and heart open to others. A loner has no place in spiritual leadership, nor does a person who prefers projects over people. Whether introvert or extrovert, the elder must be people-oriented. And that's from a commentary I was reading And I just really like the way they worded it, because that's the truth. It's not about being an introvert or an extrovert, because you have both types in elderships. You have some people who are very gregarious, and then you have some that are a little more quiet. But both types, whether an introvert or an extrovert, can be a people-oriented person. They think about others. They are looking out for others. They open their lives to other people. And that's what hospitable means, is to be the kind of person that if I've got it and I can share it with you, I will. And so that is a characteristic you need to see in an elder, and it makes sense, because if you have an elder that really is oblivious to people, you're going to have some pretty major problems, because that's what he's going to deal with day in and day out, is people. He needs to be able to teach. Titus points out that he needs to be able to teach because he needs to be able to exhort in sound doctrine and refute those who contradict. An elder, part of his job is to be the one to say, no, this is the truth, this is a lie, we will go no farther. They need to be able to identify false teaching and barricade and protect the congregation from it. They need to be able to identify sound teaching and make sure that the congregation is being fed that sound teaching. Paul, when he spoke to the elders in Ephesus, pointed out the fact that he had in every way made sure that he had not shirked from teaching them the whole counsel of God. Paul told the Ephesians that as an apostle, one of the things that he did was make sure they had the whole truth, not just the parts he liked talking about. And that's what an elder needs to do. He needs to make sure that the flock that he's amongst is getting that steady diet of the truth. And in order to do that, he needs to know the truth, and he needs to be able to teach it himself. He needs to be capable of teaching. And this version says able to teach. I think the New King James Version says apt to teach. It has to do with somebody who has a teacher's disposition. He's the kind of person who has the ability to both learn and share that knowledge with others. Whether he does it publicly from the pulpit, or whether he's better at personal one-on-one study, he's somebody you look at and say, that guy can teach. That guy can share knowledge. He can answer questions. Because once again, if you have an elder that can't answer Bible questions, that's a problem, isn't it? If you have an elder who you don't think you could go to and ask a question about the Bible, and he would at the very least be able to get back to you and say, I'll find that answer and get back to you, he's not going to be able to lead the flock in the truth. He needs to be, one, not addicted to wine. The Greek for this word comes from the idea of somebody who is around wine. Para oinos, para means to be beside or around. Oinos is wine. He needs to have an attitude of certainly prohibition from drunkenness. But he's also the kind of person you don't think of that issue of alcohol being wrapped up in his life. It is not just a part of his normal existence. It's not something that you associate with him. And so as you look at somebody who's going to be an overseer, this just needs to be a non-issue. He needs to be somebody you think is sober-minded, will always be sober-minded, and his mind is always going to be clear. He's not caught up in this particular issue of alcohol. He's not pugnacious. Pugnacious, that's a fighter, is really the idea. He's not quick-tempered. There are certain people you just, as much as you love them, that you know as soon as something rubs them wrong, they're going to kick back. They're the kind of person, if you tell them something that bothers them, they're going to get an edge really fast to them. And that's the idea of pugnacious. They're quick-tempered. They're going to have an outburst of anger, and of course, an elder can't be that way. Because if an elder is watching over the flock and you think, oh, he's going to explode any second, you just can't trust him. You just can't trust that kind of a guy. He's like a stick of dynamite. He may not explode right now, but you don't really want to carry him around in your back pocket either. He needs to be gentle. Of course, this kind of goes hand in hand with the idea of not being pugnacious. He's gentle he's a non-combative, he's a kind, he's patient. You know, you think about somebody who's gentle, you talk about a mother with a baby, what does that look like? You know, making cooing sounds to the baby so they'll sleep, holding them just right. You think about it just kind of like, I don't know, how do you hold a baseball bat versus a baby bird? You hold a baseball bat and you kind of choke up on it and you grab it as tight as you can. What happens if you do that to a baby bird? You don't have a baby bird anymore. You've got a little pine box. And so that's what an elder needs to be. He needs to be gentle. He is within his capacity as an overseer of the congregation going to constantly have people's lives in his hands. And if he is quick-tempered, or if he is callous to their pain or to the delicacies of people and people's relationships, he's just going to cause more trouble than good. He's going to cause more harm because he isn't gentle. He's like a bull in a china shop. And so elders need to be kind and patient towards Christians, even Christians who are wrong. And that's part of the issue of being gentle, is as an elder, he's going to very often be dealing with Christians who are making bad decisions. How's he going to deal with them? Because on one hand, you could stand up when somebody's making a bad choice and you say, you're sinning, you're wrong, head to the back of the bus. And you would be right in one hand, but you'd be very wrong in another, wouldn't you? And that's where gentleness comes in, is that you're dealing with people in the most sensitive times of their life, and you need to have patience with them. Free from the love of money and not fond of sordid gain is what Titus says on the subject. This has to do with his attitude towards the dollar bill. You take money, and how many people's lives have been totally destroyed because of the love of money? Money has wreaked havoc in marriages. It's wreaked havoc in people's spiritual lives. Money is this thing that everybody has to interact with, and yet so many of us interact with it poorly. We become greedy, and we hoard it, or we don't think about it, and we aren't good stewards of it. We have no balance in our attitude towards money. And an elder is somebody who has to have that balance. He has to have a proper attitude towards it. Yes, money's a tool, and he knows how to have a proper attitude towards it, but on the other hand, he's not fixated with it. Because the moment you become fixated with money, you're not going to make healthy spiritual decisions. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, down in verse 4, it says he is having children who are under control with dignity. Titus says that he is to have children who believe and are not accused of dissipation or rebellion. These two go hand in hand. One of the things that you'll see when we get to the qualifications for a deacon is that a deacon does have to be properly managing his household. So he needs to have children who are under control. You look at his kids, you say they're doing well, the family unit's well. An elder ups it a notch in that he needs to not only have a healthy household where there's dignity in the way that he is raising his children or has raised his children, but you've now reached the point now where you're looking at the end result. See, you could look at me and you could say, well, is Scott managing his household well? And you could make a call one way or another on that. But if somebody asked you, has Scott done a good enough job that you can feel confident that his kids will be believers, could you say that at this point? There's no way. You look at Gus, and there's just a whole lot still to happen before you could make any sort of decision in that area. So you can look and say, well, he's doing okay now, but what about the long term? Now, with an elder, you need to be at the long term. You need to be able to say, okay, his kids, even if they're still in his house, they have reached the point where they have made their faith their own. They are believers. They believe in God, and they are not rebellious. You can look at it, you say, okay, they've kind of reached that stage where you would look and you'd expect a teenager or something like that to just explode. And no, they are faithfully standing by the truth. And as you look at it, if he has children who are believers, it doesn't mean he's going to have perfect children. But you look at him and you say, here's a guy who's done it well with his children. With their varying personalities, their varying attitudes and things like that, you could say, okay, he's done a good job raising those kids, and they have turned out to where you can now say, okay, they're making Christianity their own. They are believers themselves. He's not a new convert. This is just a kind of a simple one, but it's a big deal, meaning, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are you saying the children being believers, even after they've moved out, or are you talking about just as long as they're in the elder's house?
Okay, so that's a big question.
I know.
It is a big question. So I'm going to tell you my answer, which is, I don't know. What I can tell you is here's the qualification is. You're looking at, what we're looking at is we're looking at the man who's going to be the overseer. We're not, the only reason we're looking at the kids is in reference to him. In other words, the kids are not up for eldership. He is. But just like his wife is not for eldership, we're looking at her because it affects him. That makes sense? The kids are the same way. So here's how the argument goes. And I'll tell you both sides, and I'll tell you where I lean, but that's just my opinion, so you might as well just crumple it up, throw it away in the garbage, because it doesn't really matter. The way the arguments go is one side says, okay, yes, we're looking at him, and so here's his kids, and they were faithful, and they were believers, and then he has a son who reaches, 47. And that son takes a nosedive, and he falls away from the church, leaves the truth, he's no longer a believer. One argument would be, well, look, the reason we were looking at him, at the son, was to see whether this guy had done a good job raising him. He hasn't been raising that kid for years, and so you say, well, okay, this qualification, the father who was up for elder, he meets it still because the kid has long left his household in the father's influence. In other words, the kid's living over in North Carolina. The influence has basically been severed other than, family holidays. So that's one argument. The other argument, I believe that to be a valid argument. The other argument, which I think is also valid, is the kid gets to 47 and he falls away, and people say, well, how do we not know that you could trace the root of what it, it's kind of like a ticking time bomb. It took 47 years, but you track it back and there was something wrong back there with Dad. So what you run down to is, I think you've got good brethren on both sides of it. I lean more towards the first than the second, certainly in the case of the 47-year-old. But now if you say, well, he's 22, the kid's 22, right. The moment he left, he was faithful all the years he was in the house, and then the moment he took his bag, stepped out of the door, he imploded. Well, okay, now I think an argument could be made here that there was something else going on. So, but what it does come down to is, I think it's a judgment call. I mean, the entire elder selection process is a judgment call. I mean, it's just like I said with the respectable thing. If a guy's going to be an elder, he has to be respectable. How do you know he's respectable? I know it when I see it. Well, here's the problem. You know it when you see it too. And sometimes I see it and you don't see it. And so that's why we do things and we say, well, what percentage of the congregation sees it? Because we're all making a judgment call off of that. And so I think the issue you're asking about comes down to that same idea. I'd say the 47-year-old, I'd feel pretty confident Dad could just stay an elder and there wouldn't be a problem. 18-year-old just packed his bags, I'd say Dad needs to step down. Somewhere in between there, we're going to have to make a call. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Yeah.
In my mind, it goes back to what I was commenting on earlier. People that are qualified as elders are top-notch people that have exceptional family lives.
Yep.
Wonderful people that we can all admire and respect.
Mm-hmm.
If we have to debate about whether or not it was his fault that his son's in prison, or
Right.
he's had a DUI,
you just put the kid in prison. I just said
He raised 5 good kids. It's not his fault that 3
right. I absolutely agree with you. If in doubt, I always feel err on the side of caution with it, for sure. But the point is if you look at it, can I say he's definitely not qualified? That's the real question. And my point is, I think there's 2 sides to that. But if in doubt, I feel like you do, we always are looking to not have that debate. You're looking for men who you don't have to have that question at all, for sure. I mean, I agree with you 1,000% over with that, I hope the kid's not in prison. But, if that happened, you would have to assess it, especially if the guy's been an elder for a while. Because this is the other side of it is, what if the man's been an elder for 20 years, and then his kid goes to prison? This is horrible. This poor hypothetical family we just are destroying,
It's not hypothetical, and I'm sure if we told the people that have been in the church long enough, you can pull up bad examples of where these things happen.
For sure, but at the same time, we are using a hypothetical right now. And I'm trying to laugh about it because I'd much rather laugh about it than cry about the times where things like this really happen. But when a guy is an elder, what happens if you have the guy and he's in the eldership, and it happens, and he asks the congregation, should I step down or not? Sometimes it happens where the congregation begs him to stay. Well, no. In other words, you've got these issues, and it's a legitimate issue. Certainly, if you're in the elder selection process and the guy's kid's already in prison, I'm going to feel a little bit better about just saying, let's back away from the orange jumpsuit. So, but sometimes you have to deal with it on the other side of the equation as well. Not a new convert, meaning he's not a new Christian. He needs to be of good reputation outside the church. This is dealing with unbelievers. The way elders are viewed and by those who are not Christians is important as well. As you look at how people interact with everybody, both those they are close to and those they are not close to, those they agree with, those they don't agree with, that's where you get to truly see somebody's character. And so, how do people who are outside the church view this man? And this can sometimes be a trickier one to find out the answer to, but as you see people interacting with others, you begin to get a feel for them. Are they genuine? Are they the kind of people that all mankind looks at as a respectable human being? Okay, we'll stop there. The other qualifications that we didn't deal with because they're in Titus, but I'll just list them for you real quickly, are not self-willed, Titus 1:7, not quick-tempered, which is very similar to pugnacious. He has got to be someone who loves what is good, says Titus 1:8, a just man and a devout man. Like I said, we didn't deal with those because those are in the book of Titus. Anybody have any comments or questions? Okay, we'll stop there. We'll pick up with deacons next week.